In this second part of the database lecture, we'll finish up the other operations that we're doing on a database. So I wanted to start with the acronym CRUD, C-R-U-D, and that stands for Create, Read, Update, Delete. And those are the main operations that you do in a database. You either insert a new row or create, or you retrieve rows, and that would be read, or you take a row and modify it and update, or you delete a row out of the database. And so those are the basic operations that you do on a database. And I've said before that web applications are just a nice user interface for a database. So when we have a web application, the things that we usually need to do are to create a way to create a row in a database, to read rows in a database, to update a row, and to delete a row. So when we talk about read, there are two operations that we'll do. We'll read all of the rows in a database, or maybe a portion of the rows, read more than one row in the database. And then we can also read just one row in the database. Then we'll have a way to update one row and a way to delete one row. Now that doesn't mean that we can't update more than one row at a time or delete more than one row at a time. You can add those operations into your web application, but most of the operations that we do with web applications fall into one of these 5 different pages: a create page, a read all page, a read one page, an update one page, and a delete one page. Now we've already done the create page in the last lecture where we inserted a new user into the database. So next we'll work on creating a page that will list out all of the users that have registered for this page. Now keep in mind that I'm doing this for a user that registers for a site. But you can do this for anything that you want to keep track of. So if you're creating a blog post, you can do this for a post that you do on your site, or you can do this for a comment. Or if you're doing a Facebook-like site, a social media site, you could have a wall post or a picture. So all of the nouns that you have within your site, usually those nouns are a database table, and you need to create a way to create one, read one, update one, and delete one. So let's go ahead and I'll snap my fingers and create a new page to list off all the members. Alright, so now I've created this members.php page. Like all pages, I require the footer at the bottom, require the header at the top. I also require the functions right here, and then I print the header off right here. I also added a link into my navigation bar that will link to it. I put it on the left of register, so we can click on the members and it links to this page right here. Now the first thing that we need to do to be able to start listing off all of the members of our site, and just as a side note, we might not want this page to be public to everyone, to be able to see all of the members that have registered for our page. But we probably want a page like this at least for the admin or somebody that administers your site, so that they can log in and manage member accounts, reset passwords, or delete accounts of users that are causing abuse or something like that. So we do probably want a page that does list off all the members. Whether or not everybody can see that page is something that we might want to decide upon. And I'll show you how we can lock down this page so not everybody can see it in a later lecture. But for now, we'll just leave this open for everybody to see here. So again, the first thing that we need to do is connect to our database right here. Remember, this calls the function that connects to our database and then selects our database to use. And after we've connected to the database, we need to write a SQL statement to get all of our members out. So if you remember your SQL statements, we'll select star. Star means every column, so we want all the columns from our users table. Now we want all of our users, so we wouldn't include a where clause that would limit it to just a certain user or users. We want all of them here. So this is a pretty simple query, and the next thing we need to do is run that with MySQL query. And let's put this in. Now if I want to debug this, I can echo out the SQL query. We also want to make sure this query works, so if not results, and if results is a false value, then we know the query didn't work, and we might want to know why. So we'll print out the MySQL error. Maybe put a little an explanation, and we'll concatenate on the MySQL error onto that. And then I'm going to call this exit function right here. That just exits our script. The SQL query should work. If it doesn't work, we have a problem. So there's no need to try to finish executing this query, or finish the rest of the page if this query didn't work. So we'll just exit out of the script. That'll just stop it right here. And the only thing we'll see is this error on the page. And we probably might want a little, I'll be commented out for now, but a little debug statement. You might want to print the query out here, put a break line at the end of it, just to help us debug right there. So now we created a SQL statement to get all of our users out, and we run it. And now we ran the query, but how do we get all of the results out? Well, it should be stored in this variable right here. And so it is stored in this variable right here. This is a kind of a special type of variable inside of PHP that we haven't talked about before, but there are functions that will allow us to get each row out and then print it out. So the first thing that we might want to do is print out how many members there are. So we could say there are, and then this will be, we'll print out the number of members right here, and we'll put members like that. And let's make this a paragraph right here. And so the way that we get the number of rows that will return from the result of this query up here is with a function called MySQL num rows right here, and we just pass the result into this function right here. So the result is what we got back from the query, and later on we can print it out here. And let's save this and see if it worked. So it looks like I did something wrong, and it says it expects this parameter 1 to be a resource. So if we look back here, if we look at result right here, and I used results up here, so they are misspelled a little different. So that's the error you get if you pass in something that you didn't get back from this thing right here. So just make sure that you spelled it right. So we'll save this now. And now we see that there are 3 members. So that's nice to know. So how do we go about printing them all out? Well, since this is a list of members, it would be nice to use a table. So I'll snap my fingers and create a table with all the members. So here we go. We have a beginning table and an ending table. And this is just the header of the table, or to label it. So we're going to print out the ID, the email, and the name. We also have the hash password, but we probably don't want to print that out. And then we have a while loop, and this is going to go through all of our results one row at a time and create a table row for each one. So the way that we get one row out is MySQL fetch associative, and it will grab the first row out and assign it to the member right here. And then inside of the while loop, we'll create a table row with 3 cells, enter table row, and in each cell we'll print out the column that we want. So member is just an associative array that has all of the columns for one row. So the column names right here are case sensitive. So if we remember back in the beginning of the database video, I talked about how these names have to match up with PHP myadmin exactly, so that if we did a capital ID or a capital email or name right here, if they were capital in PHP myadmin and they're lowercase here, then we wouldn't see anything printed out. So another thing to know is, well, how does this while loop end? Well, when we run out of rows to in our results right here, then it will return a false value and that'll quit our while loop. So as long as there's a row to print out, we'll print that row out, and then if there's no more rows to print out, then it returns a false value that quits our while loop, and then we'll go down and finish up the table. So let's see what this looks like. And we can see that we see the Fred, Mark, and Mary that we registered in the last video right here. Now we could probably style this table up and do some more things to make it look better, but that's all we'll do for now. Alright, so now we need to create a page that will just list one row in the database out, so that we can just page, it could be a profile page for one member that registered for our site. And to be able to do that, we need a way to navigate to this page. So it'd be nice to be able to put a link where from our members page that will link to view a specific member. So let's go ahead and put that link. We'll have them click on the email address. So I'm just putting a link in here, and where it will go to is member.php. Now if you notice, we're doing this inside of the while loop, so we're going to make one link for each member that's in our table, but the link only shows up in our code once, but since we're doing this in a loop, we'll see it several times. But the member page will need to be a page that pulls one member out of the database and displays it, but it needs to know which member we should display. So we can pass that along in the query string by passing the ID of the member in right here, and we'll just print this right here. We'll just print it out, and let me separate the lines a little bit, and that. So we can see this really well. We're creating a table cell, we end the table cell here, we begin a link, we end a link right there. The text that will display will be the email of the member, and the link will go to member.php, but then the query string will have this ID equals, and then we enter into PHP mode and we print out the ID of the member. So this should be ID equals 1 or ID equals 4 or ID equals 6 or whatever the ID is of this member that we're printing out right here. So once I do that, I'll refresh this, and now all the emails are a link, and if we view our page source right here and we go down, and we could see that each link has the ID 1, 4, 6 for the different users. That way when we go to member.php, he can look in his query string and get this ID out and know which member he should display. So next we'll need to create the member page. Now I know the names are very similar. This one says members, so it lists all of the members, and the member page, which is singular, will only list one person. So let me snap my fingers and create this member page. Alright, so now I have this member.php page, and once again I require the functions, the header, I connect to my database, I print my header off, and I require the footer. And the only text I'll have right now is I will display the member with ID this. Now one thing to note, remember on print header, this is the title of the page, so the title of the page will be member, and this is what link to highlight. This member is still part of the members section of my website, so I want to highlight the members link on my site. So now that I have this, come back here, we'll click on mark right there, and as we could see, the members is highlighted, but right now my ID isn't showing up. So going back here, we see that I forgot my print statement right there, and coming back, so now we'll print the member with ID 4. Now notice I clicked on Mark and that was ID 4. If I click on Fred, it's ID equals 1. And if I click on Mary, it's ID equals 6. And that's because what we just did to the members page when we included that link, we printed out different IDs for each one of them. So once I do that, I need to create a SQL statement to retrieve this specific member from their database. So we'll go ahead and create a SQL query that is select star from users, and now we want a where clause because we want to limit which users we select out. We really only want one user where the ID equals right there. And we want to put the ID in quote marks. That's just a way to prevent a SQL injection error. If you're not sure what that is, just Google a SQL injection error, and if we put quote marks, it does help us prevent that from happening. And so now we need to get out of our creating our string. So this just ends the string, and then we're going to concatenate something on, and then we'll concatenate on the ending quote mark right there. And we'll just use the ID right there. And print, this will just be for debug right here. We'll print out the query, put a line break at the end, and then of course we'll run the query. So the result equals MySQL query of MySQL query right here. And so this should work right here. We'll just see it. We'll make sure that the query looks the way we want it to, and we'll see if there's any thing that pops out when we run this. So let's run it for Fred. We'll click on Fred. We see our SQL statement, select star from users where ID is equal to 1 right there. So it seems like it's all working, but to really check, we have to make sure that if result is worked or not, we have to check. If not result, then of course we print out our MySQL error right here, and X our script, just like we did in the members page. And now let's see this again, see if there's any errors. We don't see any errors. So now we might want to check to make sure that there's just one member, and so we'll do another if MySQL num rows, and we'll pass in the result here, does not equal 1, then we had a problem happen. And so we'll just print I'm going to print user not found, and exit my script right here. I might want to print a little more debug information right here just in case. Maybe I'll just concatenate this on right here. So this checks to make sure that we only had one user return. So if it returned multiple users, then something's really wrong because we're selecting it by an ID. But it might return 0 users. So let's see what happens here on our page. So we don't see anything problem with that. But what if I change the ID to 2? If you guys remember back on the members page, there is no member with a ID of 2. That's why I said user not found. And of course there's 0 rows out here. So you might want to change this a little bit to make it maybe a more user-friendly message. But this is how I'll leave it for now. And now that I have all that, I'll comment this out because I think my my query is working. And now let's get our member equals MySQL fetch associative. So if you remember, this is the same function that we used in the while loop on the members page to get us one row from the result. So this will just get us one row. We know that there's only one row because we didn't exit our script, so it must have skipped over this. So if it's equal to 1, it would land down here. So now we have a member, an associative array that represents that member here. And now when I print the header, instead of just a member, I can actually pass in the member's name or his email address. I'll pass in his name as the title of our page. So let's see if that worked. Of course, there's no user with ID of 2, so we'll do it with ID of 1. And we can see in the title that we have Fred Jones. Okay, and then I'll snap my fingers down here and we'll fill in create a page that displays the rest of his information. Okay, so now I just created a div, given ID of member, and then I had his ID, his name, and his email. And now we can use this in our CSS to style this up a little bit more. We might want to put span text around this. Could definitely use a lot more styling, but this will do for this demonstration. And we'll refresh it and we see that Fred and fred@fred.com is, and that all of his information is being printed out right there. So this is how we would list out one member in our site. And one more thing to mention is that these are case sensitive and they do have to match up with what we got from what we set up in our database using phpMyAdmin. Now we have a lot of associative arrays that we kind of use. First we have the get associative array, we have the post associative array, and we have the member associative array, or whatever we get on. We can name this whatever we want, but whatever we get off of this. So we've got to remember when where our data comes from in these arrays. Just remember the get gets its data out of the query string in the address bar. The $_post gets its data from a form that we submitted, and anything that we put over here gets its data from the database. So when we look at what we put here, just remember that this has to match up with our database. In the get, it has to match up with our query string, and in the post, it has to match the name in the form that was submitted to the page. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create the ability to update a row. Maybe Fred wants to update his password or his email or even his name. So we need to give him a way to do that. So the way that I will do that is first we need to create a link to update to a page where he can update himself. So this page will need to have a form on it. So and then once they click submit, instead of adding a new user into it, it just needs to update the user or update the user that they're updating. So this update page, just like the member page, needs to know which user to update. So we need to pass that along somehow, and the best way to pass that along is in the query string. So just like the member page knows which member to display by getting the ID from the query string, the update page will know which user to update by getting the ID from the query string. So we'll just print out the ID from the queries, the ID that was passed into the member page. We'll just print that ID back out on this update link right here. Let's finish the link. We'll just put update right here. Now we'll have a link to update that. You might want to turn this into a button or style it up, maybe put it in a different location, but now we have a link to update this person. And you can see that we're seeing the user 1 with Fred Jones, and we'll view the page source, and we can see the update. We're passing in ID 1. So if we go back to our members page and click on Mark, whose ID is 4, and we'll view the page source, we'll see that that link that I just added has the ID of 4 printed out up there as well. So that's how we're going to pass along the ID of the user that we want to update. Now once again, we probably don't want to allow everybody to update this, just the admin and Mark himself. We wouldn't want Fred updating Mark's information unless Mark gave him his password or something like that. And so we probably will want to lock down this update page so that only the admin can update users or the user themselves can update it. So we'll learn how to lock it down later on. And I'm going to snap my fingers and we'll create this update page. Alright, here's my update.php page. And as you can see, we require the functions, we require the header, we connect to our database, and at the bottom we require our footer. Right now this page doesn't have any content, but all of this is copied over from the member page, where we pull one member out, where we pull one member out of the database, and then we make sure the query worked, and we make sure that we really got one person out. And now we can see my print header right here that I call update and the name of the member that we're pulling out right there. So here we have the beginning of our update page. If we were to click on the link, we could see that it'll say update Mark Jones. Now if you've noticed, I said that I copied and pasted this over from the member page right here, and I told you that you probably shouldn't copy and paste. So whenever you're copying and pasting, you should kind of a signal on maybe you should do something different. And one thing you can do is create a partial. So for this, it doesn't print out any HTML code, and partials print out HTML code, but we can still turn all of this into a function right here. So let me snap my fingers and we'll turn this into a function. So I have cut all that stuff out from the update page, and I pasted it right here into this function. I called it getUser, so it's going to return me an associative array for the user. Is pass in your user ID, and now that we pass in our user ID, we want to update this to use the user ID that gets passed in right there, and then this will run right here. And notice if we do get errors and we don't get the user, we'll exit out of our script and print out the errors. So when we call this function, it could kill our page if we don't get a user out, and that's just fine. And then we get the member associative array out here, and we can return the member at the end of our function right there. So now that I have that in functions.php, I'll switch back to my member.php page, and that's all of this right here. Since it's all the same, we'll just take all of this out and we'll say member equals, and then we'll call get user and pass in the ID, which is that. Okay, so let's go back to our members page and make sure that worked out. Right here, and I forgot a semicolon at the end of my functions.php file. The end of that function that I forgot the semicolon, so we'll save that and refresh, and now we have all of our members right here. Let's click on one, and you see it still gets spread out. So my member page still works, and I created a function out of that stuff that I copied and pasted. I put the function in my functions.php file, and now I put it in the member.php. I just called that function to get the user out, and now in the update file I cut all of that out, and we can just say member equals get user, and we'll pass in the $_get ID right there, and that'll get a user out. And now my members on my update page for Fred Jones says update Fred Jones. So again, when you're copying and pasting stuff from one page to another, that should be a clue to you that maybe you might want to turn it into a function or create a partial. And the only difference between the two is the partial creates some HTML. So if you're copying HTML, you want to create a partial out of that. If you're copying just straight code, then you just want to create a function out of that and then parameterize it. And what I mean by that is decide what's different each time, and what's different is the ID of the user to get out, so we just pass that in as a parameter right there. And now we need to get the form. So we need to get the form from the register page, so let me open that up. And now we have our register form down here. We also have this error parts coming up here, and then we have this please register. We also have this congratulations method. And in fact, the update page is going to work a lot like the register page. And so I'm not going to do it, but I should probably look at a lot of functions that I can create out of this right here, and then put them in, because copying and pasting probably isn't that good of an idea. But just to make sure that we see the overall picture of what's going on the update page, I'm gonna instead of create a bunch of functions that hide a lot of the details of what's going on in the update page, I'm just gonna copy and paste pretty much all of this right here. So this is pretty much all of my form, and then going back to my update page right here, we have this valid post thing, and it says congrats, you are registered. Instead, I probably don't want to say you're registered, and we'll remove the congratulations. Let's say information updated right there. And then in the else place, instead of please register, we might want to say update information. And the last thing I'll change is the value. Instead of it, the button that they click saying register, we want it to say update. Okay, so let's see what that's done to this page. By the way, valid post is still undefined, so that's a false value. So we should see the form. So when we click on our members page, and we'll go to Mark, and we'll try to update Mark. A parse error on line 34. accidentally didn't end my PHP block quite right. So now we'll refresh this, and now we say this thing right here. Now the problem that we have is this form probably should contain Mark's information. And another thing that I want to do right here is after the email, we might not want, Mark might not want to update his password. He might want to leave it the same. So let's put a message right here: leave passwords blank if you don't want to change it. So that way we'll give them the choice. If they fill in the password fields, then we'll update their password. If not, they can leave it blank, and they won't want to, and then we won't change it. So let's look at this now. Let's put a line break right here. And now we see leave passwords blank if you don't want to change it. And now this is looking more like an update page, but we have to go back to our register page. And we still need to do all the same validations that we did. If we want to make sure their name is a certain length on one page, then when they register, then it would kind of defeat the purpose if they can register and then update their name and leave it too short or delete it out. So we still need to do all the same validations, and in fact we probably want most of the same logic right here in our update page. So I'll copy that out from my register page, and we'll just put that in right up here. Okay, and so now we start off with assuming that a valid post, and again this is going to be a lot like the register page. So if they just go to it, then it's a GET request, and if they submit it, then it's a POST request. So we'll check to see if it's a POST or a GET request. We'll assume that it's a valid post, and right here, this is the stuff that we want to change. So I'm going to comment this out right here, because we don't want to insert the user into the database anymore. If it's not a valid post, we're saving the name and the email away. And then down here we get the user out. We'll only get the user out if it's a GET request for the very first time. And if it's a GET request, notice how we at the end of this, how we save the name and the email from the post data. Well, let's just save the name to the member name and the email to the member email. So this is quickly becoming the most complicated page that we'll create. The reason why it's so complicated is not only do we have to pull a user out of the database and fill that into the form, but we also have to update the user. So but just to a brief review of this, remember to leave the form field in, we created these two variables right here. So whenever they submitted something and it wasn't valid, we want to leave the form field in. So later on we put the value fields of the name and the email. Well, now we're going to use those same variables, and if they first come to this page to update their information, the name and the email that we want displayed are their current name and email that we get out of the database. So we'll get the member out of the database and then save their name and email. That way it'll show up in the form. So let's see how that worked. And so now we see that Mark Jones' information is filled in this form. So now we have to work on updating Mark Jones. and instead of inserting him into the database. So we'll take out this right here, and now if everything they posted is still valid, and remember we have to still validate these in the update page, or else they can bypass our validations and put invalid data into our database through an update. But once all of the validations have passed, and you might have extra validations in there, so if you're going to put more validations in, you'd want to put them in right there. We'll just write a SQL statement, and the SQL format for update is update users, the name of the table, and set. And now we'll have a list of values that we want to set right here. So we'll add on to this. So we'll concatenate on a new string, so we have the dot equals again, and now we'll set the the name to what they posted. So name equals quote, and then we'll concatenate on $_post and get the name from the form right here. And then we'll also set the email, and we need a comma in between these. And mostly the same as this, except we're just setting the email. And we don't need that. And lastly, we need a where clause. So we'll do where ID is equal to, and we'll paste on the ID of the person that we want to update, which comes from the query string, or at least we hope it comes from the query string. Right there. So let's go down and look at where this form submits it to. Notice it submits it to register.php. So one thing, if we didn't update this, we'd submit this form to the register page, and the register page would go and try to insert this person into our database. We want this to stay on the update page right here, so it's important that we do that. But one more thing is we need to continue to have the ID being passed along. So print the ID from the query string right there. So going back to this page, we'll refresh it, we'll view our page source, and we'll see in this form that the ID is up on this. Remember, this is just like an href and a link, so it'll carry that ID in. Now, if you notice, I'm usually use the post because that information comes from the form right here, but the ID is in the query string, so I have to use the $_get. So we can use the post and the get in the same file. Just remember, the post comes from the form, and the $_get comes from the query string up above. So with our SQL statement being done, now we'll try to run it. Before we run it, let's just print it out and make sure that it looks the way that it's supposed to. So we'll print the SQL query out, and put a line break. Okay. So now we'll try to submit this. We haven't made any changes, but we'll just submit it and see what we see. And now notice we see information updated. And now we can look at our SQL query. We could see set name equal to Mark Jones, email equal to Mark Jones, where ID equals 4. And see, it's a good thing I printed this out, because I noticed now I'm sending the email to the name. So this needs to be email. So refresh this again, and now we see the email is equal to that. And we might even want a space in between there to make it a little more readable. By the way, some spaces might be optional, but the space between set and name is not optional, and this space between the end quote mark and where is not optional. So hopefully our SQL statement looks good now. So now we're ready to try to run it. And if it doesn't work, we need to print out the MySQL error, and just like before. And we don't have an error there, so it looks like it all worked. So let's go ahead and try to update Mark. Let's say that Mark wants to update his email address to Fred's email address right here. And now we do have an error there, and it's good because we're validating. We can't have two users with the same email address, so it won't allow that. So that's one error that can happen. Now remember, you might get other errors if you didn't have the right format for the SQL statement right here, but I'm gonna once again assume that if we do have an error, then it's because they have an email address that's identical to someone else's email address. So I'll turn valid post to false, and I'll also say there's an email error and add on my error email already registered onto my error string, and make sure I concatenate that on, not replace the error string. So now when I refresh this again, we'll see that email is already registered. And again, this is some of the logic that we did from before on our register page right there. And so that highlights the email address, and now Mark knows that he'll need to change his email address to something else. So we'll just try Mark 2. I'll update, and we'll see that that went through. And now going back to our members page, we'll see that his email address has changed to mark2@fred.com. And if you want to change his name as well, maybe Mark 22 Jones, and we'll go back to the members right here, and we can see that he updated himself right there. So this all seems to be working right here. So I'll stop printing out the SQL statement, and just a quick overview of this page one more time. We include our functions in our headers, we connect to our database. Now we have this valid post that we're going to assume that it's a post request and that it's valid, and an error string to keep track of any errors. Now we check to make sure it is a post request, and if it is not a post request, then we come down here and we say a valid post equals false. We pull the member out of the members page right here, and then we get his we save away his name and his email to show up in the form down below. Now if they did post something to the web page, we'll do our validations, and if everything is valid, we'll write a SQL query, try to update the user. If it all works, then everything will be valid. and when it's all valid, then we'll just say information updated. If it doesn't work, though, then we'll invalidate the post and save away what they submitted to be filled in the form. So that way they'll be able to see what they submitted and it won't revert back to what it was before. So the only problem with this page now is when I do update somebody, my title isn't going to be there, because that only happens on a GET request. On a POST request, this title will be a little bit different. So instead, I'm going to use the name variable right here, because we saved the name variable away here and we saved it away here. But I'll just take this out, and we'll save this away no matter what. And I guess we could do the same thing with our email. We might not use it, but instead of just conditionally saving that away, we'll always save it away, and that will make sure the name appears in the title. So we'll look at this one more time. We'll change Mark Jones back to the way he used to be, and change his email, and we'll update. And now we can see that it still says update Mark Jones because we saved his name, what they submitted as the name, we saved it in the name variable, and we printed it out in the print header variable. So one more thing that we need to do on this page, and again, I know there's quite a long explanation, but this is the most complicated page that we'll have in our website. Just a lot going on. We have to check to see if we want to update his password or not. So if we do have a validation on the password length up here, then we might want to remove it, because we might want it to be blank. But now what we need to do is check to see if we need to update the password or not. So how we can check that is to see if the password, if there's a length on the password, and the best way to do that is create a variable called password. Now we're already going to check to make sure they're the same right here. So this is one of our validations. Now if they're both blank, that works, but if they're not both blank, then we'll get an invalid post, and we won't even come down here. So if we're down here, we know the password and the password confirmation match. So we'll just save away the password right here, and then we can do an if statement. If there is something in the password, remember an empty string is a false value, so if it's blank, then this will be false, and we'll skip over this. We'll then create a hashed password with the SHA1 function from the password right here. And then one more if statement. Remember, if statement is the tool of choice. If we have a hashed password, then we need to update it. So to update it, we'll just leave a space right there, but to update it, we'll have to make sure that we put in a comma here and then do that. So we'll just add on to the SQL query to have the password, or the hashed password, be equal to the hashed password that we just calculated right there, and we need a comma right before it. And I guess we can take out that space, because if we leave off this comma, then we won't have it there. But we leave it off so it'll work with it, but we need to put it in if we have this here. So we leave it off here if this doesn't show up. But if this does show up, then we have to put it in, and then we won't have a comma at the end of that. So we'll go ahead and try to update Mark's password. There's an error in line 32. I forgot a semicolon. Try to update his password. And now information updated, and we can use phpMyAdmin to make sure that worked. But when we did that change, we also want to make sure it works if he left the password blank as well. So we tested it with a password and without a password, and it looks like both of them worked. And as we could see, that Mark too has his email address updated. So now the last page that we need to create is the delete page. So maybe Mark wants to delete his account, or the admin wants to delete Mark's account. What we would need is a delete somewhere. So the best place to put a delete button might be right here. We can also put delete buttons in this table right here if we wanted to, but I'm just going to put a delete button right below this update button. So this is on the member.php page, so let's pull that code up. And now we have this update button. Let's put it on the line below. We'll put a delete button. Now this here is really a link. And when we go to delete things, we don't want a link to delete stuff, because if we do it with a link, then a search engine could come by and it would, if the search engine came by and followed that link, it would delete the data out. What we need is a post request to delete data, and post requests are considered unsafe, meaning they change the database in some way, whereas GET requests are supposed to be safe and not change the data. So if we did a GET request that deleted something, then that would not follow the rules, because that would be a GET request that changed the database. So we, if you notice, both the register page and update page use a post request to change the data in the database, to either add something or update it. So the delete request needs to be a post request as well. So we'll create a form with an action of delete.php, and we'll make the method a post request. Okay. Now, along with this, we'll put our button in here. And we'll just make the button say delete right here. But now the delete page wouldn't know what to delete, so we can either put the ID of the user that we want to delete up here, but I'll show you a different way, is to use a hidden field. Now hidden fields won't show up, so this won't be a field that the user can fill in, but it will send the data. And so and we'll just print out the ID of the user that we're currently viewing right here, and we'll pass that into this hidden field, so that when the user clicks delete, we'll pass this along to the delete page so they'll know who to delete. So we'll refresh this page, and now we have a delete button. And when we view our page source down here, we can see that we have this delete thing right here, and we have the hidden field with a value of 4. That's because we're using viewing Mark, whose ID is 4. If we're viewing Fred, whose ID is 1, then there would be a 1 in there too. So just like we did up here, but now we're doing it with a hidden field. So now let's create the delete page, and fortunately the delete page is a lot simpler than the update page or even the register page. It's actually even simpler than the member page, or just about as simple as the member page. So it should be fairly quickly to create. So I'll snap my fingers to create this page. Alright, so I have created delete.php, which is the same name as the action on the form that we just created. So that when I submit the form, it will come to this page. I included my functions, my header, connected myself to the database, and I printed out a header saying member deleted, and then there'll be a link for them to go back to the members page right here. So all we have to do is delete the member. Now again, this is a page that we'll probably want to lock down. We won't want to allow everybody to delete people. So we'll learn how to lock this down later on, but for right now we'll just let anybody delete anybody, and it will lock it down later. And so the SQL query that we run is, I'll just snap my fingers and fill it in. So this should look somewhat familiar, except for now we're using a delete from users, and we don't want to delete all of our users, so we need a where clause to limit it to just the user that was submitted. Remember, we had a hidden field with the ID in it, so that would be the ID of the user. So this should read delete from users where ID equals, and the ID of the user we want to delete. Then we run the query, we make sure it worked. If it didn't work, we'll print out the error and exit. If it did work, then we'll go ahead and print up our page and have a link back to the members page. So let's see if this works. We'll try to delete Mark Jones, and it says member deleted, going back to the members page, and he is no longer there. So that's the delete page. Again, we do need to do some checking to make sure the user who's deleting them has permission to delete them. Right now, anybody could go into our website and delete all of our users. They can update all of our users' information and see all of our users. So we'll lock that down and implement security later on.